Our research program focuses on how humans acquire, or how we learn motor skills. So how we, like move in our environment. Specifically, we're interested in the neural processes. So how our brain changes as we learn new skills. And we do a lot of work around trying to figure out different methods for learning new skills, and particularly around how we can make it faster, more efficient. And it has longer term applications, I think, in rehabilitation and stroke and those sorts of areas. My second year of my undergrad, I did a neuroscience course, and the professor, there's this kind of famous study, and it's not a nice study, but they take there's a cat, and the cat's walking on a treadmill, and they actually sever its spinal cord, which is terrible. But the cat keeps walking, right? And so you start to think about like the complex processes that are happening here in the spinal cord and the brain, and how you move. And to me, it was kind of fascinating, like the first sort of like insight into the world of neuroscience. And so from there, I just pursued studies that related to neuroscience, but also mixing it with like the practical application in kinesiology and then physiotherapy. So to me, I just have a real passion for understanding the brain and how it works. And amazingly, I think we think we know a lot about the brain, but do we really know 2% of all the things that happen? Maybe, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity for discovery. And so I think that kind of drives me in my interests in that area. I think all research is important. I think that's the first thing to understand, is that we have a continuum of research from fundamental, all the way through to applied clinical health systems, in the school, for instance. But where I think we come in is that if you're going to do a treatment, so if as a physio, for instance, if I'm going to apply something into a patient in stroke rehab, I need to know how to optimize that treatment. So I have to think about what are the parameters, like what am I actually doing with the treatment to the participant? And from my perspective, we have to think about how we're actually modifying their brain. And so if we don't understand what each treatment is doing in that regard, how we can best appeal to processes in the brain that allow it to recover, say, after a stroke, we're not going to be very effective as clinicians. And so to me, our research is focused on how do we modify those treatments, or how do we modify parameters of treatment that will have the maximal impact. So a lot of people will think that you're doing kind of fundamental or basic research, but in fact, without that fundamental or basic research, all the things we do later tend to not be effective because we're not using it in the best way. So I think that's why it's important. It also relates just to our theoretical kind of knowledge of how our brain works and how we acquire motor skills, for instance. And it's really applicable across a broad range of fields. So I think that's why it's important to me. I think the main problem it addresses is actually trying, at its most kind of fundamental level, I think it's about understanding how our brain actually processes information and then changes in a way that allows us to acquire skills. So we do it every day. I mean, people learn a skill and initially they refine them over time, but there's so many different ways that we can learn the skills. There's different ways that we can optimize how we learn them. And again, I think that has applications in the long term and how we actually best develop protocols for people to learn skills. And in fact, I think a lot of it has to do with relearning, right? Because people are trying to learn a skill that they've lost because they've had a brain injury, for instance. And so how we can best do that, I think, is what we're trying to figure out. So to me, it's addressing kind of knowledge of the processes in the brain related to that. So I think that's probably the main gaps that we're working on. We use all types of methods. So I kind of, when I talk to our students and collaborators and stuff, we like to think of, we apply the method that is needed to address the question. So I certainly don't think of ourselves as being like a methods lab so much, but methods that we use commonly are neuroimaging methods. So some are in-house here, so we do a lot of non-invasive brain stimulation. So we can assess properties of the brain as well as interrupt brain activity, for instance, to investigate its function. And then we also use a lot of different neuroimaging modalities: electroencephalography, magnetoencephalography, functional magnetic resonance imaging. So all kinds of imaging to figure the state of the brain, whether it's at rest or whether it's active. And then none of the brain imaging stuff means anything if you don't understand behavior. So you have to understand if, is somebody actually learning a process. So we use a lot of behavioral techniques as well. So a lot of our participants will undergo protocols where they actually have to learn a skill over, say, 5 weeks or something. And then we do, repeated examination of their brain. So we combine the neuroimaging bits with the behavioral bits to try to figure out what's actually happening. So I would say, those are the main kind of modalities. But the other bits that we do, I think, a lot are some advanced analytical techniques. So we do a lot of machine learning and some artificial intelligence around data analysis. It's a tough question. Because we've done a lot of research projects. I think one that was really kind of interesting, and because it engaged some of the community here at Dal, was we do a lot of research on imagined practice. And so not actually physically performing it, but just like picturing yourself or imagining yourself performance. And it's really incredible because, in fact, you can learn a new skill entirely just by imagining it. You don't have to actually practice it physically, although that's the best way to do it. And we were really interested in understanding the effect of experience. So your prior experience had on brain activity as it related to when you were doing this imagined practice. And to do that, we needed experts in fields, and so we actually recruited members from Dal's varsity volleyball and basketball teams. And long story short, people did imagery, the imagined bit of their sport-specific skills that they weren't so good at. So like the basketball players did volleyball, volleyball did basketball. And then we had a bunch of people just from the community who tried to do those skills as well. And I think it was the first time that anybody really showed that when you do imagined practice, your brain kind of is influenced by how experienced you are with it. And that sort of set the stage for some things around how we might actually apply protocols in the future in using that in rehab and in other areas. I think that the students need to be keen, like interested. Grad school can be a long haul. 2 years for a master's, 4 to 5 years for a PhD, and there's some times where there's ups and downs, but research in general can be challenging. There aren't a lot of wins along the way. There are some, but so I think that people need to be keen and motivated and really passionate about what they're doing. I like to see grad students who have critical thinking skills, so they come in and they can kind of identify some gaps in knowledge related to the programs of research that we're doing, and come up with some novel ideas around that. So I think that's important. The other thing I think is we just have to have fun people, like good personalities, and that makes the lab group, I think, really a good cohesive group. And it's important because we do a lot of collaborative work. So I think being able to work in a team environment is also critical. So the number one piece of advice I give every grad student that I meet who says, I want to come work in your lab, the number one thing I say to them is that they have to remember that they're actually like a commodity. And what I mean by that is that they have skills, abilities, and knowledge that we all as investigators need. And so sometimes I think, even when I was a prospective grad student, I thought, I'd be really lucky to get into this lab. And I always kind of flip it and say, no, I'm really lucky to have you in my lab or our research group. And so when you flip that kind of way of thinking, they start to think about, I should be compensated for my time there, right? So we should be thinking about, they should be supported in the lab, like, the resources they need, the funding supports should be in place to do that sort of thing. I always tell the students that, like, if I didn't have any grad students, it'd be pretty lonely. It'd just be me, and I wouldn't do any of the work, right? Like, I wouldn't get anything done because it's the grad students that do a lot of the heavy lifting. So to me, it's that they're making a really valuable contribution to science and to the lab, and I think that they need to make sure that they recognize the value that they bring to a team. And I think that kind of sets the stage for a good relationship between, like, an investigator, a supervisor, and the students. Because we're awesome. I mean, that's the first reason, I think. I think I would say that, kind of in our field, I think we're probably like leading the field worldwide in our area. So I think we're advancing knowledge, kind of at the forefront. The other thing, I think over years we've developed a really strong training program. So I've been Dal now for 13 years, and we have trained a lot of masters, PhD, postdocs. And it's just a really good environment. So we have great facilities, we have great equipment, but I think that one of the most critical things is the people. At any given time, we have between 10 and 15, even more grad students, and it creates a really kind of just a nice environment for learning. People share from each other, they build off each other. And I think that support and mentorship that's available is really critical for developing the skills as you go forward. So to me, it's a nice package. And Halifax is also a great place to live. So I think those are the kind of reasons why people should consider the lab for sure, and the School of Physiotherapy.
Okay, what was your first job?
It was in a lumber yard. I worked out in the yard. And funny enough, just as a side note, I know these are supposed to be quick answers. I worked there I started when I was 16, and I think I finished I worked there for 13 years. And I actually, at one time, had my PhD, and I was still working there on weekends while I was doing physio school. And even more interestingly enough, at one point, 3 of us that worked in the yard all started when we were 16, and we all had some form of we were all doctors, either a medical doctor, chiropractor, or PhD. And we were all working there on weekends while we were still just finishing training. It was a very educated lumberyard.
Okay, if you had to choose, mountain or beach?
Mountain. No, beach. No, mountain. I don't know. Beach.
Why beach?
Actually, not a beach. I hate sand. Oh my God. I love sand in the beach, but sand infiltrates everything. Mountain.
What's your favorite random fact?
I don't know. I know all of the trim levels on Ford F-150 trucks.
And last one is, what inspires you?
Lately, the success of others, I think, is what inspires me the most. That's a big part of my job, I think. So I think seeing other people use what we've done or how I can help them or something and seeing them succeed, I think, is probably what inspires me the most.